has already decided that as a DCM she can go over. Christina on the fly is the for today, and we're going for 15. That said, people often make changes in their lives for the better. How do you ensure that the changes you make will be everlasting? Our speaker, Shubha Amba, apologies, is an avid reader of human behavior with a focus on learning how to be a more effective human being. That's something I think we can all benefit from. In her investigation on drivers of change, she stumbled upon some truths about human nature due to which she feels very empowered. Today, Shubha will present her second speech from the Evaluation and Feedback Project in Level 1 of the Presentation Mastery Pathways journey, in which she will share some of these truths. Shubha hopes to empower her listeners to make changes more effectively. Shubha joined Toastmasters in 2000, simply for the love of public speaking. Everyone, please help me in extending a warm welcome to distinguished Toastmaster, Shubha Amba. Fire for change, Shubha. Wrong way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How did you feel when the last time you put a beautiful smile on the face of a loved one? Whether it's your son, your spouse, or your mom. Because you promised to spend some of your precious time with them on a regular basis. You were fired up, your reason being that stronger bond with your son, a better relationship with your spouse or partner. And of course, the price was that beautiful smile. But then the fire fizzled and your efforts to make the change became a chore and you gave up. How do you feel when you are not able to keep that promise to that special someone in your life? Pretty regretful, isn't it? Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. To make a change, you need to get excited about it. In other words, you need to fire up for change. Only 8 to 10% of the people who are trying to make a change will actually succeed. Because most people unwittingly fire up against change. As it is your brain really that does all the hard work for you to make a change, you need to know what fires up your brain for change. Therefore, in my presentation today, I will cover 3 aspects. The first is give you a few brain basics based on the triune view of the brain. Then give you the brain rules, both for and against change. And finally, how should you fire up for change? Now let us understand, first of all, the basics about the brain using the triune view because it is a very simple way of understanding the brain. According to this view, there are 3 parts of the brain piled up, one on top of the other. At the very bottom is the instinctual brain that is responsible for our survival instincts of fear and aggression and housekeeping functions of breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. On top of that is the emotional brain that is responsible for our habits, memory, and emotions. And finally, at the top, you have the rational brain, also known as the cortex, responsible for all the executive functions, which essentially involve thinking, such as analyzing, decision-making, or planning, or judgment. Now, depending on which part of the area is active, the brain fires up, quite literally, because on imaging technologies, these firings actually show up as dramatic bursts of light. So those are the few basics of the brain as far as you need today for my presentation. Now let us talk about the brain rules. The brain follows certain rules when it comes to change, 2 of which fire up the brain against change, and 2, for change. So let us first look at the 2 rules that fire up the brain against change. Rule number 1, brain sees change as hard work. Do you ever remember your mind wandering off in a business meeting to an upcoming party, a wedding, a vacation? Yes. Whenever the brain receives new information, that is when we receive new information, the cortex in our brain starts to fire and process that information instantly. But processing new information takes up a lot of energy and burns us up such that we find new information processing hard work, and it does become a chore. The average attention span of an adult in this room, guess what? In seconds. Only 8. Therefore, the first rule that the brain sees change as hard work and wants to run away from it. The second rule is that the brain sees change as a threat. Now, if you were to walk in this room and expect to see a Toastmasters meeting and instead see this, you will be surprised, shrug and walk away, maybe even join in. But instead, if you see this, you are going to run for your life. I guarantee you, you will not even give it a thought. The rule here is that when the information that is presented is too different from what we expect to see, it is the instinctual brain where fear resides fires up and pulls energy away from the cortex such that we get fearful and we stop thinking. Therefore, rule number 2, the brain sees change as a threat and gets scared. Now let us talk about the rules for change. Rule number 3, when the brain gets excited, it makes new neural connections. Now that perfect bond you wanted with your son, the wonderful relationship you want with your spouse, that wonderful smile, these are your reasons for change, and your reason for change excites you. And neuroscientists are telling us when the brain gets excited, it fires up all at once. The entire brain fires up all at once, and that's when new neural connections are formed, which, by the way, is the biological definition of a change, a new neural connection. Therefore, rule number 3, and those are your connections. And yes, as these connections are happening, there's a flood of adrenaline that happens that inhibits your resistance to change. The power you feel, the rush you feel, the lack of inhibition, that comes from the adrenaline, and you form new neural connections. And therefore, the brain needs to get excited to make that change. Rule number 4, the brain needs a little help with reminders to stay focused on its reason why. Just that smile on the face of your child, your spouse. Remember that. Stay focused on that end state vision. And that will firm up your neural connection and push it down into your emotional brain where the habits reside, and it becomes second nature. And therefore, rule number 4, and that's your emotional brain, where the habits will be residing. And therefore, rule number 4, that you need reminders to stay focused. Now, to sum it all up, on the side of the rules against change, because it's hard work and a threat, the brain parts are actually competing with one another for that energy, the same energy. And therefore, this is how you feel. Whereas on the side of the fighting for change, the excitement and reminders help the entire brain to work together to make that change. And this is how you feel. Now, what do you need to do to fire up for change? First of all, 2 things. First of all, know your reason why. That perfect relationship, that strong bond with your son, that beautiful smile, that's what excites you. That's your reason. And when you are fired up, your brain is excited and fired up too. So know your reason why. Secondly, remind yourself over and over of that end state vision, that smile. Use post-it notes everywhere. Ask your friends to remind you. Better still, make it a daily morning ritual. Whatever it takes for you to make that change and let it work for you. So if you want to be successful at keeping that promise and not live a life of regret, just do these two things. Know your reason and help your brain to focus with reminders of that end state. If you do these two things, I guarantee you, you will fire up for change. Your brain will fire up for change, and you will make that change. Mr. Toastmaster.